Episode 48, serial healthcare entrepreneur behind the female Viagra, Cindy Eckert. Welcome to The Art of Excellence, a show about people doing extraordinary things in their lives. I'm your host, Glenn Zweig. Thanks for joining me. My guest today is Cindy Eckert. Cindy is a serial entrepreneur who built and sold 2 pharmaceutical companies, one of them for several hundred million, and the most recent one, Sprout Pharmaceuticals, for more than $1 billion. Sprout is the company with a product that's been dubbed by the media the female Viagra. She subsequently founded The Pink Ceiling, which invests in companies founded by or delivering products for women. Cindy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So first thing is, I don't do all of these live. This one here is face-to-face. Thank you for agreeing to do this. Always love when I can see my guests. And I'm noticing a pink suitcase. I know you're in town for a little bit. I'm noticing some pink on the outfit. There's obviously a pink theme going on. What is with the pink?
So the pink for me is really this shift that went over the course of my career from underestimated, which I am underestimated. I'm unusual in my industry. I'm unusual in the subject matters I've taken on. And it's that shift from underestimated to unapologetic. And it was about owning this femininity, what I brought to the table, and the fact that I actually liked the color pink. And when I started out with my product, which we'll talk about, that was dubbed the little pink pill, everybody looked at me and sort of patted me on the shoulder dismissively and said, "Oh, that's cute. You know, that's a cute endeavor." And I think you have 2 choices to make when people apply all of this, societal, unconscious, often bias. We see pink as weak. You could either shy away from it, reel back, I think, in frustration or self-doubt, or you can go right for it, which was the choice I made. I wear pink all the time. I show up in blazing hot pink, including to government agencies. And I talk to female founders all the time about really owning that piece of you that is true.
And maybe just to build on that, stepping aside from the businesses and the brands that you've built, thinking about your personal brand,
Sure.
the Cindy Eckert brand, what is it? What is your brand?
Oh, I don't know. I think you're really I never had intention behind that. For right or for wrong, I think it was never about me. I'm very much the workhorse. Put your head down, do the work. And I think the brand is results. My results are what are going to speak for me. That's what enters the room probably before I do. And that's what really matters. I live authentically what I believe. I pick those projects, those companies, those products that really light me up. And so I think they're all some bit an extension of me. So if you look at my body of work, you probably get a good picture of who I am, and the kind of things I like to take on and talk about.
This will be hard to convey over a podcast, but you've got incredible energy. And it's just interesting. I interview a lot, not just entrepreneurs, but just people very passionate about their endeavors, and I can feel it. So it's always interesting when people exude warmth and emotion.
It's the pink.
It's the pink.
It's the glow of my suitcase, my shiny shoes, my bag, my lipstick, right?
Yeah. If you look in my wardrobe, you'd be hard pressed to find anything that's not blue. So perhaps.
There you go. All right.
So Cindy, you had a pretty, I guess, maybe unusual childhood. My understanding, moving around every year after year, from 4th grade all the way perhaps through high school.
Through my senior year, yeah.
So I have to imagine that must have been pretty hard on you.
So look, I went kicking and screaming. So grew up, if you dial back to my childhood, I'm like a very average middle-class American kid in Rochester, New York. Blue-collar town, at least the part of town that I lived in. And we went from there to my dad coming home and saying, "Hey, do you want to go to the Fiji Islands?" I didn't even know where Fiji was. I was in the 4th grade. I think I ran to the globe, like in the living room, and swirled it around and realized it was the other side of the world. And I knew nothing about it. And he said, "Well, great, we're moving there." And as naturally any normal kid from Rochester, New York makes a move to Fiji. And, I went there with no understanding of what that would be like.
What was behind going to Fiji?
So my dad was State Department, and my dad is truly to the core an extraordinary adventurer. And so for him, this was this opportunity. And for us, we were a little bit like the Griswolds go to Fiji, like no clue. Here, this family goes over there. And what ended up happening, whether it be that move or all the subsequent moves thereafter, was you get really comfortable being uncomfortable. And I'm the perpetual new kid. Like, I was not going to be readily accepted. I was going to have to stand at the corner of the room, figure out what was going on. And just by that time I'd broken through and had friendships, we'd be picking up to move again. And I think that, while at that moment in time it was disruptive, it has so much laid the foundation, for what the rest of my life has worked out to be. And I think it was a real gift.
Everyone's wired a little bit differently. I can see some kids really taken to that, the adventure of it, if you will, and in others, it just being too much, to adapt over and over again like that. So I guess you were resilient. You were able to figure out a way to make it work for you.
Fortunately, I think I was wired from a very early age, thanks to my family, with curiosity. And so I went into those environments, curious about what they presented. Everything has something to offer you. And because of that open-mindedness to all of it, kind of took all of those things and packed them in my bag as I went away. So there was a fun to it. The disruption was just the social aspect, of being a kid and wanting to be in the cool kid crowd and all of those kind of pieces of it. But the appreciation of different points of view of different cultures was just so, I don't know, there's so much growth in that.
Were you a driven kid? Were you competitive?
We were competitive, but really sort of against our own personal best. I like that. I don't know really how that came to be. I think we weren't so much competitive against, others, but really like, we can do better. Like, let me one up my last best.
And if you look back at that period in your life, did you have a sense that, you're going to conquer the world one day, you're going to have a company, multiple companies, or were you not one of those, mapping out your life's journey at the time?
I can't imagine that I was actually that clever to know that. I think that what I had was and cultivated was this appreciation of what made particular things great. So I'll geek out here for a second. I grew up when I was in Rochester in my sort of normal phase of childhood. Every Sunday we went to a grocery store called Wegmans. And I am a literal raving lunatic about Wegmans, a family-owned business. Why were they so exceptional? How do people work there for 35 years in cashier positions? And I think that exposure, like, I always loved sort of the experience of certain businesses that got it right, even from a very young age, and figuring out and wanting to go back and visit. And my brothers would tell you that there wasn't a single childhood game that I played in which I wasn't the CEO of that particular company that I was devising in my head. So that probably was there, but I certainly had no idea that that's what I was going to do. I would have told you I was going to be the president.
So if we fast forward, through school and you're ready to embark upon your career, it wasn't like you started your entrepreneurial journey. You went the corporate route. You went into pharma. So why pharma? Why healthcare? Were you attracted to the mission, or were you just looking at where are there growing industries, growing companies, and that would seem to be an open opportunity for you?
Very unlikely way in terms of why I got in. So I was fortunate enough to have a business professor in college who I think saw in me this sort of love of business. And she would have me do these side projects in which I would report to her, who were the best companies out there, what were they doing that was so exceptional. And really through that process, I made this unilateral decision that I was going to work for Fortune's Most Admired Company. That was it. Fortune's Most Admired Company. It could have been anyone at that time, but at the time I graduated, it happened to be Merck Pharmaceuticals, a huge, pharmaceutical company. And I was hellbound and determined that's who I was going to go learn from. I was going to learn from the best, and then I could take it anywhere. And I can remember applying. And then I think my business professor got a little bit anxious that I needed to hedge my bets and apply a few more places. I said, no, I'm going to get in there. They weren't hiring when I got out of school. But 7 months later, they were. And they gave me the job.
The job being what?
Sales. entry level. Started in sales in the DC area, and the sort of surprise, I think, is it was wonderful to go learn business from the best, but I fell in love with the science. So I loved the sector. I loved what you could do for people in people's lives, and that was really giving me the purpose for what I was doing. So I think, it could have been any business, but lucky for me that it was a business that had such an incredible impact in people's lives.
And I don't know how long you were there, but I believe there were a series of smaller and smaller companies. So walk me through the journey. Give me some of the highlights until you got to the point where you're ready to start your own thing.
Yeah, so here I am at Merck, and I realized very quickly that it is very big. I am but a number, and no one is going to listen to what the sales rep in DC has to say. And that didn't work for me. I'll go back to these big brothers of mine would tell you, like, I wasn't going to be silent and not heard. I wanted to contribute, and in a more meaningful way. And I'm watching actually one of my big brothers who at this time is in a startup in the .com era. So here he is in this company, and I'm thinking, wow, he's being pushed to do all of these different things. He's never done that before, and they're telling him, go figure it out. And, he's taking on all of this additional responsibility. And by the way, he has skin in the game. He has equity. So wait a minute. So not only do they listen to him, but he actually gets a piece of the value he creates. And his company was about to IPO. And I can remember, like, there was a friends and family round, and I probably ate, ramen noodles every day for a year to try to save up as much pitiful little amount of money that I could to put in. And I invested it in the company. It IPO'd. I made money, and I said, that's what I'm going to do. And I literally left Merck, went to a company that was, a relative unknown. I thought it was so small. It wasn't actually that small. Small was when I started it for myself, and there were 3 of us.
Well, relative to Mark, it was small.
It was small, and it was a huge flyer to go to this California company. And I went there, and I can remember
another pharma company.
It's called Pharmaceuticals, okay. And I went there, and the first night, like, all my friends at Merck think, it's like you'd won the lottery. That Merck was a very elitist culture. You were so lucky to get in, and there were but so many slots, and it's Fortune's most admired. And here I am thinking, oh no, what did I do? And the reality is, I did the best thing ever for the rest of my career, because I went to a smaller environment. I was not just a number. I was heard. I was constantly pushed to take on new things outside of my comfort zone.
Which was what? Were you beyond sales at this
point? Yeah, so I went
or?
from sales to sales management. I went from sales management into corporate marketing and branding. And then the company was acquired. So I got to watch what that process looked like. When the company was acquired, it was bought by an Irish company called Elan Pharmaceuticals. And Elan had bought up 3 other businesses in the U.S., and they'd sort of let them all alone to operate in their silos. And now they had critical mass. And this was my big break. I got to be on the integration team to think through, what would we divest? What would we keep? What would the sales organization look like? And it really was sort of, how do you put together a company? And I got that opportunity inside of Elan. That stock vested in the sale. I took those winnings, and then I went smaller again. I basically got on the journey of smaller until I was a little crazy, or crazy enough to start it from scratch myself.
And so let's go there.
Yeah.
Was the intent behind it that if I want the real financial upside, here's how I do it? Or was it more that I want to, put my own stamp out in the world, or even maybe just frustration that even as small as you go, it's still other people you have to answer to? Like, what was the driver of wanting to go out and take that risk?
The driver was my terms. And you know what? My first company's name was Slate, which says it all. Clean slate, on my own terms. And what that was a recognition that, I was in an industry that I loved for what it could do. I didn't love how it got it done. And I think because I was driven, I had achieved in these different environments, but I was completely uninspired. And if I looked around to my left and my right, there were plenty of other people just like that. And my hypothesis was, okay, what if I took some of those people, put them in an environment that was different, we'll call it a little unpharma-like, and put culture first and built it from scratch? Would it be successful? And the answer in 4 short years was a very loud yes. And that was such fun. The Slate days was a lot about my own stamp, about a culture that mattered, people first. At that point in my career, I got into a place where, either I was in businesses that were being acquired, they were getting ready for IPO, and they were oftentimes managed by VCs, right? Who sat on the board, venture capitalists sat on the board. They managed to the spreadsheet, and they lost, I think, the social aspect of this kind of company, particularly a mission-driven pharma company that's most important goal is to serve patient needs. And so that was a little bit about an industry that had lost its way, my looking for inspiration, and the belief that I'd been around long enough that while I certainly was privileged to be around incredibly smart, incredibly hardworking people, they weren't smarter or harder working than I would be. And why shouldn't I take the swing on myself?
Well, let's zoom in a little bit here. What was Slate? What was the focus? What was the market? What did you see?
So Slate was, we had a single product, unconventional in pharma. You usually had your bets, but single product. It was at the time the only FDA-approved long-acting testosterone treatment for men. And it had been innovated by this great formulator in the industry. He had it as almost a hobby business. He literally took orders on carbon paper. This was not that long ago, right? This was in the early 2000s. And I looked at who was using this in the country, and it was not a single urologist. Ironically, it was being used all off-label in women. So my journey to find a product for women's sexual dysfunction started almost in the Slate days. Didn't make sense. Urologists should be using this product for men. One urologist in all of the country was using it. And I thought, well, if we could get this asset and put basically, a good commercial organization behind it, where would we take it? And in 4 years, it became the second most prescribed testosterone among urologists. It was a rocket ship ride.
Oh, wow.
And so that was fascinating to sort of be part of that. I want you to know that was not a up and to the right line. There were a lot of little fits and, bumps in the road before it kind of took off. But it was such a great learning experience, especially knowing that early hypothesis of could you collect the right people, create a culture of almost, retro culture in pharma, and take this on, do it successfully, that we could.
So before we get to Sprout, what was the end result from Slate? Did you sell it?
I did. Yeah. So I'll tell you, actually, the end of Slate is really the Sprout story. So while I'm inside of Slate, here I am, in this field of sexual medicine, and I'm proudly going to all the scientific meetings. We're presenting all of this new data, and I'm watching as a spectator this incredible science emerge in terms of our understanding of what unlocks desire in women. And there was a German company innovating this science, and they would be at all of these conferences. And I'm just thinking, finally, there's one for women. At the time, there were 25 FDA-approved drugs for some form of male sexual dysfunction, and not a single one for women. And so in 2010, this German company went to the FDA. They took their data set, and the FDA said, go do more work. Not surprising. 80% of the time that will happen. The surprise came when they, instead of going to do more work, decided they were going to put it on the shelf. They were going to walk away completely from this development program, and that made no scientific sense to me. So it was really based on, I think, the belief that the path would be longer and the hurdles would be higher because of all of our societal narrative on women and sex. So inside of Slate, I spent a year just talking to women with the condition. I literally went out, acquired Addie, the product, and sold. In order to finance taking that on, I needed to sell Slate. So I sprouted out of Slate one day before I sold it.
And how big of an exit was Slate? Was that a huge?
It was big. Yeah. We're private, but hundreds of millions of dollars. And we sort of came and went in the cloak of night in the research triangle. But I sold it, turned around to all of my shareholders, and I said, okay, great. Give me some of that money back because we're going again. And we're going to do this for women. And thankfully, they bet on me.
Just for clarity here. So this is to treat something called hypoactive sexual desire disorder, which essentially is low libido for women.
That's right.
Fair enough.
Yes.
And so this other company had, they went down the road, they hit a wall and they decided to shelf it. I mean, I get you were attracted to the space, but what did you see in terms of the business that they didn't see, that you went to investors and said, I think I have a way forward that this company does not?
I don't know that I saw something they didn't see. I think I had the stamina that they didn't have. And what I will tell you is, so it's hypoactive sexual desire disorder is called HSDD for short. Same prevalence in women as ED has in men. So it's women's most common dysfunction. ED is men's most common dysfunction. We know that's an extraordinarily large category. So ED is a $6 billion category globally. And so I think everyone knew market opportunity on the basis of prevalence. I think what they didn't want to do is go through what became a sort of societal debate on whether or not women needed this.
Because it's more taboo with women?
Totally. I think when something goes wrong for men in the bedroom, not only, and you might laugh at this, is it a national emergency?
Absolutely.
I'm not even kidding. We literally fast track drugs for approval. They get the same treatment as drugs cancer, life-saving drugs. Viagra, when it came to market, met such an important unmet medical need. The FDA reviewed it in 6 months in order to get it to market. By contrast, it took me 6 years in the regulatory queue. We have a very different value of sexuality. And then furthermore, I would tell you, if something goes wrong for men, we say, oh, biology. If something goes wrong for women, we go, oh, psychology. And the truth is, men and women bring both of those things into the bedroom. And what was outrageous to me is that despite the fact that we knew there was a biological basis for women, we were completely ignoring it.
So I don't want to I don't want to be the Dr. Ruth show, and it's I try to make this as PG as I can. Just plain devil's advocate here. With men, perhaps, as you point out, physical, it is sort of somewhat of a black and white issue in the sense of there has to be something that gets activated, and what do you know? Presto, take this purple pill or whatever it is, and look what happens. I'm just wondering, with the women's side of things, is it as black and white, or is it more in the gray zone? It's controversial. Do they find the products not be as efficacious? Like, there must be a little bit more to it than it just being taboo, or maybe it is.
Well, it's taboo for sure, and it became black and white through brain scan imaging. If you look at medicine sort of over the course of the last 10, maybe 20 years, we have learned so much from functional MRIs, from PET scan imaging. And what we had learned in this condition is take a woman with HSDD, take a woman with the normal ebb and flow of desire, put them in a PET scan or MRI, expose them to erotic cues, their brains light up totally differently. And what we understood there is there's this balance of serotonin and dopamine that's needed in order to respond to sexual cues. The truth is, for men, we think of Viagra as a desire drug. It's not. It's an arousal drug. It's very different. It is a mechanical, I can see it, and therefore I believe it. But the truth is, desire for all of us begins in the brain. And many men who are on the testosterone treatments, including my former product, are treating constellation of symptoms, one of which is low libido often. So we don't see that. But we believe it when a man reports it, and we monitor his levels. So I think that there is a lot of just sensitivity to the discussion in women versus men.
So walk me through the game plan. You buy this company, you're gonna open up this space that's pretty much been shut down. Did you walk into it having a pretty good sense of here's the 6 steps I have to get done to make this thing work, or was it figure it out as you go?
This is going to sound so naive, but to me it was science, right? And I'm going to tell you why that seems, it shouldn't be. It should be that straightforward. So the beautiful thing is the German company had gone forward and the FDA had given them feedback. So I had a roadmap. I knew exactly the additional work that they wanted them to do. So I had an opportunity to sit down with the FDA. I went through that. I said, is this what we need to do? Yes. Great. I went out and did the work. And it is very straightforward. Double-blinded, placebo-controlled trials. There are pre-specified outcomes that you have to meet. We went out. We did the work. We met all of those. Then we submitted that, and I was waiting for approval. I was getting ready to launch. This was my plan, and the FDA rejected us. And that was the blind side. That was so unexpected for me, where I was really following this very scientific linear path. And when they rejected it and said, well, the benefit is modest. And I thought, wait a minute, modest, it's meaningful. It moves into the scale, into the normal ranges using the instruments that have been validated in this condition. And, women report it to be meaningful. And that was really the aha moment that it would be a very different path for me. And, that was truly the end of the company. The FDA completely controls your fate. I got a no. And I can remember going home that weekend. That was a rough weekend. I got the news on a Friday, and everybody else went home to polish off their resumes and get ready, to find another job. And over that weekend, I went back to my inbox, and thousands of women have written me over the years. Thank you for letting me know I'm not alone. Thank you for letting me know there's a name for this. And on it goes. And after I went back to that and reminded myself why I did this in the first place, I went on a Monday and made a decision to dispute the FDA. I like to call that the road less traveled to fight the government. And I think similarly, my team, I can remember showing up on Monday and gathering them all around the big table.
Does that happen? Is that a thing to
it's a
dispute?
path.
Thanks for your recommendation.
It is a path.
We'd like to challenge it.
It's a path. And I'll tell you why I did it. Because everything comes down to risk benefit. In life, probably, right? A risk benefit analysis, which feels very objective, but it's quite subjective. Because if I assign no value to the benefit of something, then any risk would be too great. And what we were making here in my mind is a value judgment on whether or not women needed this. And what we needed to do is go talk to the women who were living with it. And I had 13,000 women worth of data. 13,000. The reason I think for the moxie in making the decision to dispute them is the data was on my side. I had all of that. I'd done it in spades. And what we hadn't done, in my mind, is put the patient at the center of the conversation, which is also an FDA mandate, actually. So, in conditions in which we don't have solutions, who should we be talking to other than the patients that are living with it to understand definitions of success? And so when I disputed them, to their credit, they opened their doors up to the public, and they themselves assembled meetings with patients who had the condition, with experts who treated women with the condition. And that became a, several year journey of listening to those patients before they ultimately assembled a scientific panel to review all of our data. It was the first time really on the public stage, so to speak, everybody had seen our data set. And when they did, they voted overwhelmingly to approve the drug.
And so how soon after you got approval did you get approached? You sold for $1 billion?
I did, $1 billion up front. Yes. So I'll tell you, when they assembled this scientific panel, they make a recommendation to the agency. The agency doesn't literally approve you that day. So they made this overwhelmingly, they voted that they would approve the drug. All of a sudden, as soon as that happened, big companies were like, oh my God, this woman in pink is going to do it. This company based in Raleigh is actually going to do what none of us have been able to. And so the suitors came calling, and there were 3 different companies that were very interested. And the one that emerged the winner, importantly for me, not unlike when I sold Slate we was the company that was going to keep the entire team. Because I know it's all about the people. It's always all about the people. And my group we were 35 people when we got this drug approved. And they were blood, sweat, and tears committed to opening up this door for women. We never set out to create a blockbuster drug.
You sold a company for $1 billion worth of your life story isn't going to work here for my podcast. Because what's supposed to happen is you're supposed to fail with the first company. Then I say, so Cindy, what did you learn from the first one that failed that you took
I have a good
to the next one?
This,
but I still do want to know, though, all kidding aside, what were some lessons from the first one that you took, even though the journeys are very different, but anything you learned, whether it was about hiring, about instilling a culture, anything that you took to sort of change the game a little bit with that second company?
No doubt. I think I learned along the way, not only, I used to have a drawer, and I always kept it, of people who had been terminated from the company. And it was sort of my drawer of shame. And how did I, not get it right in terms of the cultural fit or whatever it may be. And I think it taught me along the way that in interviewing, you think that you're choosing. And I think what becomes so important is they're choosing you too. And that has to be an equal energy that they want to come there. And it's about laying all your cards on the table. I have a very unusual culture. We are incredibly quirky, the land of the misfit toys in every way. And, for some people, they're going to hang out with us for 2 months and be running for the doors.
No, hang on. I want to go back so I saw that. And so quirky. Do you hire for quirky?
I do.
Tell me more about that.
That's a little weird to say, right? I hire against these 6 different choices I think people make. And the choose to be quirky is really more about choose to be yourself. We're all quirky. And for me, what I learned in big environments, if I look back to the early days of my career, is we sort of beat people into sameness, right? We have one way of doing things and that's our way. And you take all of that individuality that I think makes really great decisions happen in the boardroom. Great decisions happen inside of the company. So we celebrate the quirks and the individual. And I think that's just permission to be constructively irreverent in our culture. That's very important. In terms of other lessons, my biggest lesson in sort of selling the first business, and look, I fail every day. I mean, failure is just part of the test of, how committed are you to it. But when I sold Slate, typically particularly in this industry, you get an upfront payment and then you hopefully have some kind of back end, right? It's milestones, it's royalties, whatever it may be. And so when I sold Slate, I had a royalty and it was governed by classic boilerplate legal language, a best efforts clause. Well, I realized really quickly that my version of best efforts and someone else's version of best efforts can be radically different. And I wasn't always satisfied with the energy they were putting behind this brand that was my baby. So eyes wide open and lucky for me, when I sold Sprout, similarly, with the $1 billion up front, there was a participation in royalties. And with that, I wrote really specific performance obligations. So the contract began best efforts and it evolved to this much money toward education, this many salespeople calling on OBGYNs, real specificity, no showstoppers. It was launch 101, but that became my opportunity when things didn't go my way to revisit the contract.
You sell the company for $1 billion and you could have just sort of, sailed off into the sunset. Right. That's what you're supposed to do. Yeah. You didn't get the memo, clearly.
I didn't.
I guess the company, and I don't know what you can talk about here, but they clearly didn't meet all of their obligations. You sued the company and actually ended up getting the business back.
We kept the $1 billion.
You kept the bill. So this is a huge market opportunity. They bought it. What happened? They just sort of fell asleep at the wheel, or they tried and couldn't get any traction? What was the situation?
Their company went through incredible turmoil, for lack of a better word. And I think that their CEO was replaced. Their share price, plummeted. And they were, in my mind, preserving. I think that the original intent was truly there. But when their house was burning to the ground and they needed to preserve the existing business, this was the last thing in the door. It was brand new. It required new spend, new energy, and it really got pushed to the side. It just wasn't getting the attention. And so I think, when we approached them again to give it back, in order to get their attention, it ended up being a lawsuit. And in exchange for dropping the lawsuit, they gave the asset back. The path to more money was the lawsuit. There was very specific obligations under the contract. I mean, who's to say? I don't have a crystal ball, but there was an obvious sort of path in court. And here's what I love. So my shareholders had to vote for us to get this back. Not a single one voted against us getting it back. And they had a big return, and they too could have sailed into the sunset and had a little bit extra. And I think that speaks volumes to the real reason we did it in the beginning, which was this mission. We didn't work this hard. We didn't fight the good fight for women to not have access to it and not have a choice. So I think we collectively decided, not on our watch, we're going to get it out and we're going to make sure women genuinely have access.
Well, when you sold the business, were you never intended to go along for the ride and run it? Or did they not want you? They wanted their own people? What was the story
The
there?
intention, and really part of the reason that I picked this particular company to buy it, because there were other suitors, was because they would keep me and my team. And this was my baby. This is my passion. I'm deeply passionate about women's health. And they also were, very good at acquisition. And as we had that discussion, they were going to go out, acquire more women's health brands. We would build this wonderful Sir Women's Health franchise. And when the world went sideways, I couldn't have written this movie more dramatically than how it went. It was literally, we announced the deal in August, right after our approval. It didn't close until October. And 7 days into the deal, their world went sideways. And, Mama Bear, founder, not happy, don't know what's going on, clamoring for information, being sort of left on an island. I have this whole new team going out into the field. And so I was invited to leave. That's how I like to put it.
Invited to leave. That's a nice spin. Okay, I'll take it.
Invited to leave. And, you have to sort of check yourself. You're a founder. You're almost irrationally passionate about your company and this product. And they had paid $1 billion for it. And I thought to myself, all right, I'm going to move to the sidelines. I'm going to cheer them all on, but I'm going to have the comfort that at least all of my people are still there. And within about 30 days, they were all gone. And that was crushing.
So I want to get to the next chapter, which is, what are you doing with the company now? But again, I'm stuck on this $1 billion number, not just because it's a big number, but how much time elapsed between when you bought the business and then you got through the FDA approval and then sold it? What are we talking about here?
2011 to 2015.
So 4 years.
Mm-hmm. I've had 2 4-year runs.
You basically built a $1 billion business in 4 years with 35 people.
Right.
Right. Were you beside yourself? Was this just like, oh my God, a dream come true? And how's your life changed since this time?
Oh, that's such a good question. Not much. I got to tell you, my bank account got bigger, but I still showed up for work the next day after I sold it. And, the day that I sold, Slate was a huge exit. And literally I had just formed a company the day before. I sprouted out of it and formed a new company, and I showed up for work the next day. It's what I do. I love building. This is my passion. This is what tears the sheets off in the morning to get out of bed. And so I think it doesn't change except for the reflection that you now have a massive opportunity to do good. Somebody said to me, the 2 hardest places to be are no options or every option. And I felt like I had this unbelievable opportunity. And that's really what started my work in the Pink Ceiling. So that was really post Sprout, how am I going to do my best work going forward? Of all the things I've done over the course of my career, my happiest achievement of all is the multiplier effect of ownership. So everyone who came to work for me got skin in the game, whatever they did. And to see what happened in those outcomes for them, and to see not just financial freedom, but this freedom to sort of follow your passion and to make decisions differently is just extraordinary to me. So that's really what the Pink Ceiling is all about. It's the multiplier effect, a pink army of women getting to $1 billion exits, if I can get them there.
Now that you have this company, you got a fresh start. What's the game plan? What's the goal? What are you aiming for?
It's ever so simple. Get it to market and let women have access to it. It's so, to get Sprout back, the satisfaction is during those intervening years in which I didn't control it, I'm watching this product. It's the only thing on the market. 10% of pharmacies in the U.S. stocked it. 10%. It was outrageous in its price. They doubled our price. Everything about that was the antithesis of who we were as the founders and what we set out to do. And so the satisfaction to come back, to price it right, to give women a free trial, to make sure insurers paid for it, just like they paid for men for the last 20 years, to have women go on the product every single day and write in letters of their experience. And by no means am I saying all women will respond or it's some panacea, but they have a choice. And now they can go out and have this conversation. So it's been really fun.
It's a crazy gargantuan effort in the sense of I mean, you're not just the chief executive officer. It's almost like you're the chief evangelist officer, right? Because you've got to get doctors on board, insurers on board. Women have to know about this. A lot of them probably don't even, they may know that they have issues. They don't know that it's solvable.
And I'll tell you what, and it's also not exactly a clean slate, because we went from the day we were approved, we were the biggest news story in the world. Extraordinary, right? It just almost unbelievable. And yet it went to deafening silence in the absence of leadership. And, people will reach their own conclusions. So you've got physicians out there who heard about it and then nothing happened. And they're like, well, that must be bad. What does that mean? So it's really like we're digging out. And it is a huge task. But I think that slow and steady will win the race. I think you just show up and you do the work and you do all the right things and everything starts to, knit together in the way that it's supposed to. And I'm so proud of my team, even having reimagined. So the beauty of sitting on the sidelines for a while is you have to test yourself of what would you do differently. And for me, I was watching a trend emerge in terms of telemedicine. So for conditions in which, I don't require a physical exam, I can have a telephone consult with a physician licensed in my state. And I'm watching the success of this on men's health, that side of the equation. We see those ads all the time on Facebook or radio. And I thought, well, actually, when I got Addie back, my worry was a woman would run out to her OBGYN and they wouldn't know. They hadn't been seen by a rep yet. They might not be current on the literature. And so to create a network, I approached some of these huge telemedicine companies and said, hey, here's my hypothesis. Women would like to bring this up from the privacy of their home. And it's completely independent of me. So they're going to leave me and go to you. My requirement in order to direct them to your company is that your group of physicians be truly trained. And I at least knew that they were getting to somebody on the other end of the phone. And that has been wildly successful for us and is really a reimagination of, a pharma path, if you will.
So you mentioned the pink ceiling, which, as I understand it, it's almost a hybrid VC / incubator / advisor, either to women founders or companies that make products for women. Any favorites?
I do love a woman who is out of Penn. She has a flushable pregnancy test that's coming to market. Why should 80% of pregnancy tests be plastic? I mean, completely millennial point of view on eco-sustainability and also the discretion in the conversation. I think she's going to disrupt that market. I can't wait to see what happens.
So you're enjoying being on that side of the fence as much as being on this side.
So, I mean, how fun. People come to me with these incredible ideas every day, and I get to be a part of it and help them get there hopefully a lot faster than they might do on their own.
I saw a quote of yours somewhere. Empathy is the DNA of a female rule breaker. So what do you mean by that?
So I think that there are all of these rules of society. There are the rules of law and order that we all have to follow. But then there's a lot of unwritten rules. And I would argue that women are subject to more unwritten rules than men. And in order to break it, it's something that has deeply impacted them or others. And that's why they will take the big swing. I mean, for me, really, I think my deep passion for this conversation, for women having options, for taking it seriously when things are going wrong in the bedroom for women as well, is years of listening to other women who are dealing with it. And that empathy. I just spoke at a conference last weekend, and a woman came up to me after I got off the stage, and she said, I heard you on a podcast a year ago. You saved my marriage. And I said, oh, I'm touched by it. She said, wait a minute. I want to tell you the whole story. And, she proceeds to how this had been sort of the demise. When things break down in the bedroom, they break down across the breakfast table. And so all the resentments had crept in and everything. And suddenly she heard me and thought, what if this is it? Because we'd had a great marriage with beautiful children. And she said, I ended up having the condition. And she said, can I take a picture with you and show my husband I met you? And it was so, I was crying. I was so moved by it. And that's that empathy, right? That's that piece of it. I look at the female founders who come into the Pinkubator, particularly tackling taboo subjects. It's an area when everybody else runs away, I run in. And I see the why. Why are they doing it? Even if it's less sensational. I'll tell a story about Ivana, who's a CEO of a product called Fathom. And it's a device that starts to monitor your movement and understand for athletes when they start to deviate in their movement patterns, so it could signal that you might injure. She was a high school athlete counting on a full ride scholarship to Duke. She injured. She was a soccer player. She thought, being who she is, like, well, I have upper body strength. She became a rower and got a full ride to Duke. Wow. And she entirely has invented this for her younger self so that somebody else doesn't have to walk the same steps that she did.
I mean, I would say empathy is critical for any leader, but maybe for women, you're saying that much more important, given that they're at this almost disadvantaged starting point.
You know, I'll tell you, I don't know more important, but I think it is something that should be recognized as a trait that makes them exceptional in the C-suite. And if I think about the world today that's going to, I've talked about this earlier as we were talking, like management by spreadsheet, right? Everything is just data. Empathy is going to be that distinction of exceptional leadership who can look at the data. I mean, data is informed differently through that lens. And I think that's really important that we don't miss that.
Are there any other ingredients beyond empathy that you think are pretty critical?
Yes. I think that there has to be, particularly in this moment of entrepreneurship, everything we see celebrates funding as the destination. Oh, I got the big check. That must be validation. That is the moment that terror should begin, because you as an entrepreneur have now taken somebody else's college fund for their kids, their long-term care money for their parents, some money that is of value to them. And it's your responsibility to be great stewards of that and then to return them not only that money, but more on top of it. And I think we're cavalier about that today. I would also argue, I'm certainly pro female founders, and I can spout data for days about how they'll return the investment. But part of that, I think, is they sleep with that at night. They feel the magnitude of someone else betting on them and that responsibility, if you will, to pay it back. That I sniff out all the time today in pitches that come my way. They think, oh, you've got the money to lose, Cindy. Come on, just write me a check. And I'm like, that's not how this works. That's really not what the system is.
That's how you go from being a billionaire to a millionaire.
There you go.
Cindy, I think we all have this almost fantasy-like notion of being an entrepreneur. I think for a lot of people that haven't gone through the journey but are contemplating it, they get mentally attached to the glamour, the money, sure, the fame, the fortune, the freedom, being your own boss, et cetera, et cetera. I'd say, having gone down the path myself, not 1,000th of the success you've had, but just having gone down the path, the reality is a bit removed from that image. So how does one know if they have what it takes to start a company, and not just start a company, but succeed on that journey? Like, do you feel anyone can do it? If there's a will, there's a way? Or do you think there are some people that really should just stay in more of a corporate setting and find a way to make that work for them?
I think anyone can do it, provided this. We think that the only path to success is having all the answers. So if you are one of those people who feels like you have to know it all before you leap, you will never get there in entrepreneurship. Success isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the courage. And it's just the courage to just keep coming back day after day. It is so lonely, entrepreneurship, I think. It's the creditors calling because you've maxed out the cards. It's the, panic of not being able to pay back your investors. It's the blindsided punch in the gut, of a supply chain issue, whatever that may be. I think it's really about that courage that you've got this, you'll figure it out, and stamina really to go the distance. But the only folks that would get in their way from that are the ones that actually think they have to have it all figured out. You need to accept you will not have it all figured out. You will be surprised. And if you just believe in your own capability to get through that, I think anyone can do it.
So if you look back in your pre-entrepreneurial days, if you were giving advice to someone that at some point they want to take that leap, and between today and the day they get there, they want to absorb as much as they can, they want to learn as much, Are there particular roles? Are there any sort of lessons learned in terms of these are the things I think you should try to do in a safer environment before you take the leap? Anything you would have done differently yourself to be more prepared?
There's some beauty in like not knowing what you don't know, because then you just have to, you got to clean up your own mess. I think that was kind of fun for me. Even Slate was, I'm going to make my own mess. I was cleaning up other people's messes in other environments. Like I might as well make my own and see if I can fix it. I think that the reality of what, if you were thinking about it today, what I would say to you is get in the room with people who've done it. And there's so much possibility in that today that I think wasn't even there when I was becoming an entrepreneur. If you think about all the co-working spaces, you can go on Eventbrite and find all of these things. Literally get in the room with people, considering that same leap as you are, and pick their brain. So the DNA of a rule breaker, I think, is empathy from a female perspective. DNA of an entrepreneur is curiosity. And if you aren't constantly seeking and learning and looking to your left and your right and pushing yourself, I think that you'll not be resourceful enough, if you will, in the fight to establish something as an entrepreneur or build a business from scratch. I go back to my parents on this one. And it's, if I asked my parents to help me with any piece of homework, whatever piece of homework that was, they would say the same 4 words. They would say, well, what do you think? It was infuriating at the time because I just wanted the leg up. I wanted them to help me. And what they were doing is really cultivating independence. So it was independence of thought. It was resourcefulness to go ask somebody else, to take in their opinion, to form my own. I think that, like, if you're thinking about making a leap, be insanely curious in finding out from other people.
They wanted you to learn how to learn.
They did.
In essence.
Yeah. I might be being kind to them. Sometimes I think they just don't want to deal with me. but I look back on it through rose-colored glasses, which is, and truly they are so curious by nature, and they are, they have pushed that for sure. That's a big piece of it.
If you could rewind the tape, go back and start Slate, the very first one, over, and or Sprout, anything you would do differently, anything that, knowing what I know now, this is how I might have approached it to, when I say quicken the success, it was so quick as it was, but anything that, if you had to do over?
I think that it's all part of it. I think all of the punches in the gut that I got in there probably built the courage, the stamina, the everything else. If I could go back and erase those, would I have gotten to a better outcome? Not necessarily. I think that those are, I said that the failure is really the test. Failure is the test for how much do you want it? How committed are you to see it all the way through? I think I'm fortunate that a long time ago, I decided win or lose, I was taking it to the mat. And that's how I sort of play life in general. Like whatever the outcome, like see it all the way through. And I think that all of those were just part of the path to seeing it all the way through.
It's clearly important to you to be an advocate for other women entrepreneurs. What's behind that?
I think it's a responsibility to show back up.
To pay it forward?
It is. I think that's a responsibility. I mean, it's unfortunate that it's a relatively lonely club of women who've sold their business for $1 billion. Look, I think that this is so important to me because I've walked a mile in their stilettos. And as I looked at it, it's one thing to do it myself. Like I was a little bit of the, outlier in the room, and that was fine. Like I was determined, I was achievement oriented, I was going to get there. But then to sort of witness the path of Sprout and the very different tale of two sexes of having built a company with a male drug, built a company with a female drug, suddenly I had an eye-opening moment of what it meant to advocate not only for yourself, but for each other. And that's really what informed my work going forward in the Pink Ceiling. We fight 2 injustices. One is lack of access to capital. How can only 2% of venture capital go to female founders? 2. And that has been totally flat over the years and despite the data of outcomes. So one is that piece, putting my money where my mouth is. I'm going to bet on them the way I wish somebody had bet on me. And then the same thing is lack of access to mentors. It shouldn't be a lonely club to get to the $1 billion exit, but in fact it is. And that's a responsibility with that to really pay it forward and say to them, wait, I stepped on that landmine, like step left, step right. So that's how we spend our days. And I feel privileged that women find their way to me with extraordinary ideas, and the system at large would either overlook their idea or overlook them.
If you were thinking about your future and how that's going to unfold, can you envision yourself running this company 5-10 years out? Or are you more the, let me get it to a certain point, bring in a CEO, I'm going to do the next one again and again and again?
Well, I am a builder at my heart, and I love to build things. This is a particular passion for mine. I think that I spend a lot less time on a 5-year plan and a lot more time on the next 5 weeks. I really think that's, it's not that I don't play the long game in life, but I don't get obsessed with sort of where that's going to lead, even from a career standpoint, even for somebody who's not wanting to jump and be an entrepreneur and is very like sort of classical. I've always said, like, why do we treat our career like a ladder? Why is it that? Why can't it be a jungle gym? Like, just swing toward things that excite you. And I think I'll do the same, whatever that may be. We may build so much value that someone else may come in and acquire this. And that might be the right decision at the time. We may hang on to this and my employees' kids may be working at it. I don't really know. And I'm not particularly wed to either. I'm just wed every day to getting up and doing a great job and creating value.
The name of this podcast is The Art of Excellence. And I don't like to define it because I like my guests to define it for me. So when you think of the word excellence, it could be business, could be personal, could be life, anything you want. What do you think of the word? How do you define it?
Excellence for me is your best self, your own terms.
Well, it's simple, but it's very true to who you are. I really enjoyed this. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening. Okay, don't go yet, please. 2 favors. I ask simply 2 favors. One, if you could please download the iTunes app. You could do it on your phone. You can do it on the computer. Take 60 seconds and leave a review. It means a lot. 2, you can find my episodes on several social media sites, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Find the one that you like the most. Find the one where you tend to have a lot of friends and followers. And if you could please either share it in the case of Facebook and LinkedIn, or retweet it on Twitter, that would mean the world to me. So those are the 2 asks I have. I love putting together this podcast. I hope you enjoy listening to it. Thank you so much, and I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.